Let's be honest. There's a moment after a breakup where you ask yourself, will he ever realize what he lost? And the truth is, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but there will come a time when he's alone, when he's scrolling through old photos, or when he meets someone who doesn't come close to your heart. He'll feel it. That sting of regret. But here's the part most people miss. This isn't about waiting for him to regret it. This is about becoming the kind of woman whose absence leaves a mark. A woman so rooted in her value that no man's regret can shake her peace. So today isn't about him. It's about you, and the quiet power of knowing you were always the prize. And that walking away wasn't a loss. It was a lesson for him. When someone loses you, it's easy to assume that they'll just move on, that your absence will barely register in their daily life. But the truth is, when you showed up with real love, consistency, and care, your absence becomes a louder message than anything you could have said. Most people think closure comes from confrontation or one final conversation, but often it comes from silence, the kind that lingers not because you're playing games, but because you've grown tired of explaining your worth to someone who kept overlooking it. You might feel like you're doing nothing by walking away, but you're doing the most powerful thing of all. You're allowing your absence to teach the lesson your words couldn't. You're no longer reminding him what he had. You're letting him remember it for himself. And that memory won't come all at once. It'll come in waves. My absence, it hit him when he's laughing with someone new and suddenly realizes he can't be himself the way he was with you. It might come on a night when he needs someone to talk to and realizes no one else really listens the way you did. It might even come when he sees you thriving without him and has to confront the uncomfortable truth that you were never holding him back. You are holding him up. The thing about genuine connection is that it doesn't fade just because you're not in someone's life anymore. People don't forget kindness. They don't forget loyalty. They don't forget the person who made them feel safe when they were falling apart. They might push it aside or try to replace it with distractions, but deep down, they know. And that knowledge doesn't go away. It just gets buried under the noise of ego, fear, or pride, until one day, when things quiet down and he's alone with his thoughts, your silence will come rushing back. Not in bitterness, but in the calm, painful clarity of what he lost. It's important to understand that this isn't about manipulating someone into regret. This isn't about walking away to make them miss you. That only works if it's real. If your decision to walk away comes from strength, not strategy, you're not punishing him with silence. You're healing yourself through space. And in that space, he'll have no choice but to reckon with what your presence once meant. That's what people don't realize. When you were there, maybe you were always trying to fix things, to talk it through, to hold things together. But the minute you stop showing up, he has to face what it's like to live without the emotional backbone you provided. There's power in being the one who loved deeply, but still walked away when you weren't met with the same energy. There's grace in not needing to yell or chase or explain anymore, because the ones who genuinely lose something when they lose you are the ones who didn't realize what they had until it was gone. And they'll feel that every time life hands them a shallow connection, every time they look for depth and find only surface, every time they remember how easy it was to be themselves around you, how you saw the parts of them they tried to hide and loved them anyway. Eventually, your silence becomes its own kind of echo. It says, I was here, I gave my best, and now I'm gone. And that will linger in ways your presence never could. Not because you're trying to haunt them, but because real love doesn't vanish quietly. It leaves a space that can't be filled with noise. When people talk about confidence after a breakup, it's often framed like some kind of revenge arc. Look better, act colder, post more, pretend you don't care. But real confidence doesn't come from trying to make someone regret losing you. It comes from waking up one day and realizing you don't need their validation anymore. That's the moment everything changes. Not because you're putting on a show, but because you've reached a deeper truth. You know who you are, and you no longer need them to see it for you to believe it. When a relationship ends, especially one where you gave your all, there's a part of you that wants to prove your worth. You want to say, "Look what you lost," and have that recognition land with them. That's normal. It's part of the grieving process. But if you stay there too long, you keep yourself tied to someone else's opinion. You stay locked in the idea that your value is something they get to determine. And that's where most people get stuck. Confidence becomes a costume, a performance, rather than something rooted in clarity. But clarity is what changes everything. It's the realization that you didn't lose anything by walking away from someone who couldn't show up. You simply let go of someone who wasn't ready to handle the depth of what you were offering. And instead of focusing on how to get them to notice your glow up, you start focusing on your own peace. You stop performing confidence and start embodying it. Because confidence isn't loud. It's not always glamorous. It's quiet. It's the ability to sit with yourself and feel okay. It's knowing you were never hard to love. They were just not ready to meet you there. The moment you shift from needing to be seen to simply seeing yourself clearly, regret becomes their journey, not yours. You're not trying to make them pay attention anymore. You're not trying to be unforgettable. You just are, because true confidence has nothing to do with being chosen by someone else. It's about choosing yourself, consistently. It's waking up and choosing to live a life that reflects the kind of love you gave away so freely. Not to prove anything, but because you finally believe you're worth that same energy in return. It's not about being cold or indifferent. In fact, confidence doesn't require you to shut your heart down. It allows you to be open but discerning. You can still believe in love. You can still have softness. But you're no longer offering that softness to people who don't know how to hold it. And when he looks back, and he won't see some bitter, angry version of you. He'll see someone who got stronger, clearer, calmer. Someone who didn't collapse without him, but grew into a version of herself that makes him realize what he let go of. Regret doesn't come from seeing you try harder. It comes from seeing you no longer need to, from watching you build a life that no longer has a space shaped for him. Because confidence, real confidence, says, "I wanted you, I loved you, but I never needed you to complete me." And that's the version of you he'll remember. Not the one who tried to prove her worth, but the one who discovered it and never looked back. So no, this isn't about revenge. It's about rising. It's about loving yourself enough to stop begging for the love you deserve and start living like you already have it within you. And that, quiet, grounded, unapologetic self-worth is the thing he'll regret losing the most. There's a certain kind of love that doesn't scream for attention or demand recognition. It just holds space. It listens without needing to fix. It stays calm in chaos. That's the kind of love you gave him. You were the person he could come to when the world got loud. When everything outside felt uncertain, you didn't just offer affection. You offered safety, understanding, and acceptance. And in a world full of noise, that kind of peace is rare. But the thing about emotional safety is that people often don't notice it while they have it. They only feel it when it's gone. When someone feels secure with you, they might start to take it for granted. They may assume your calm presence will always be there, that you'll always pick up the phone, always forgive, always care, even when they're not matching your energy. And because you made it easy to be around you, because you never made love feel like a battle, he might have confused your peace for simplicity. He may have mistaken your softness for something that would stay no matter how little effort he gave in return. But love isn't permanent just because it's pure. It stays when it's nurtured, not when it's expected. And you eventually realized that you couldn't keep giving someone a safe place to land when they weren't willing to protect that space in return. So you stepped away, not with anger or drama, but with clarity, because you knew that no matter how much you cared, You couldn't keep showing up for someone who kept assuming you always would. That's when the regret begins, not immediately, not while he's distracted or caught up in the illusion that he can replace what you gave. But it begins the moment he needs comfort, the moment something goes wrong and he instinctively reaches for you, and you're not there. It begins when he shares something personal with someone new and realizes he has to explain himself in a way he never did with you. It's in those little moments when the connection doesn't quite feel the same, when the laughter doesn't feel as deep, when the silence with someone else feels awkward instead of safe. You weren't just a partner, you were a home. And homes don't feel magical because of their walls or their design. They feel magical because of what they hold. You held space for him emotionally. You gave him the freedom to be vulnerable without judgment. You saw past his flaws and still chose him. But eventually, you stopped choosing him because he stopped showing up in the ways that mattered. And that's the part he'll sit with. That's the piece that will echo long after the texts stop, long after the distractions wear off. He'll look back and realize that being loved by you wasn't just about the good times. It was about how you made him feel when everything else felt uncertain. And the regret won't be about losing someone who was attractive or fun or interesting. It will be about losing the one person who saw the storm inside him and didn't flinch. The one person who made it safe to be imperfect. And no matter how much time passes, that kind of peace is something he'll always search for and rarely find again. Because while attraction is easy to find, safety is not. And once someone realizes what it felt like to be emotionally held, to be accepted in their messiness, they start to understand how rare that kind of love really is. That's when he'll regret losing you, not because you left, but because he didn't protect what you offered when he had the chance. There's something powerful about knowing you gave your all. You loved fully, you showed up consistently, you offered your heart without keeping score. You didn't hold back the best parts of yourself, you gave them freely, with hope, with sincerity. And while that kind of love is beautiful, it can also be exhausting when it's not reciprocated. When you give your best to someone who doesn't know how to receive it, doesn't respect it, or worse, takes it for granted, you start to feel like you're pouring from a cup that never gets refilled. You didn't lose him because you were too much. You lost him because he didn't know what to do with someone who brought real love to the table. He thought what you gave would always be there, that no matter how little he gave back, you'd keep showing up, keep trying, keep fixing. And for a while, maybe you did. Because when you deeply about someone you try, you believe in their potential, in the good you see in them, even when it's buried under layers of fear, immaturity, or emotional unavailability. You make excuses, you lower your expectations. You give them chance after chance because you want it to work, because you know what the connection could be if they just met you halfway. But eventually, something shifts. It doesn't happen all at once. It's a slow, quiet realization that your love deserves a safe place to land too. That constantly overextending yourself isn't romantic. It's self-abandonment. And no matter how much you care, you can't keep giving the most vulnerable parts of yourself to someone who hasn't earned the right to hold them. So you stop. You pull back, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. You start saving the rest of your love for you, for your future, for someone who won't make you feel like you have to fight to be seen. That's the moment he loses you. Not when you send the final message or pack your things or walk away, but when you decide your love is too valuable to be wasted. That's the moment that lives in his memory, because deep down he knows you didn't walk away lightly. He knows how hard you tried. He knows you were the one who kept the connection alive long after he stopped showing up. And that's what haunts people. Not the breakup itself, but the realization that someone gave them everything, and they couldn't even give the bare minimum in return. He'll look back and remember how you loved him, not with conditions or control, but with grace. He'll remember how you stayed when it would have been easier to leave. how you forgave when others would close the door, how you still saw the good in him, even when he wasn't showing it. That kind of loyalty doesn't fade from memory. It lingers, especially when he meets other people who expect everything while giving nothing. Especially when he starts to see that most people don't love the way you did. You gave your best, and that's nothing to regret. You weren't foolish or naive. You were brave enough to love with your whole heart in a world that constantly tells people to hold back. And now you're saving the rest, not because your love has run out, but because you finally understand its worth. Your absence. You're no longer in the business of convincing someone to value what should have been cherished from the start. That realization doesn't just change you, it stays with him. Because once someone has experienced the kind of love that holds, heals, and believes, every half-hearted connection after feels empty in comparison. Closure is something we all crave when a relationship ends. We want answers, apologies, accountability. Something that helps us make sense of why things didn't work. But the truth is, waiting for someone else to give you closure is like waiting for the rain to stop so you can move. Sometimes it never comes, and you're left standing still. That's when you learn that real closure isn't something you get from them. It's something you create through your own growth, your own healing, your own clarity. He may never say sorry. He may never admit he didn't treat you the way you deserved. He may never send that long message acknowledging how much you gave and how little he gave in return. And while part of you might hold out hope for that moment, another part of you, the part that's slowly getting stronger, starts to realize that your peace doesn't depend on his awareness. It depends on your decision to stop waiting for him to understand your value and start living like you already do. Growth is what gives you that peace. It's not always glamorous or immediate. Sometimes it looks like crying on the kitchen floor, having to delete the same number 5 times, or starting over on a day when you feel like giving up. But with every step forward, no matter how small, you start building a life that's no longer about being chosen by someone else. You start choosing yourself, and slowly your focus shifts from what he did to what you're becoming. You begin to recognize the patterns, the way you overextended, the way you silenced your needs, the way you tolerated what should be non-negotiable. And instead of blaming yourself, you learn from it. You start setting boundaries, speaking up, protecting your peace instead of constantly defending someone else's excuses. That's the real win. That's what healing looks like. Not pretending it didn't hurt, but growing in spite of the hurt. And as you grow, you stop needing the past to make sense. You stop replaying old conversations, hoping to find the moment where it all went wrong. You stop waiting for the text that says, "You were right." Because by then, you already know you were. You're no longer trying to prove your worth to someone who didn't see it. You're living in alignment with that worth. That shift doesn't just set you free. It sets the tone for the rest of your life. Meanwhile, he'll feel the difference. Not because you're trying to show off or make a point, but because growth leaves a trail. He'll see you doing better. Not louder, but calmer. Not faking happiness, but genuinely moving forward. That quiet evolution is what lingers with people. Because while regret may come and go, your growth is permanent. He'll remember the version of you that loved him deeply, and he'll have to come to terms with the fact that he lost that version. Not because you stopped loving, but because you started healing. What he didn't realize was that every time he ignored your needs, every time he dismissed your feelings, every time he took your love for granted, he was pushing you closer to clarity. And that clarity is what makes it impossible for you to ever settle for that again. You outgrew the version of yourself that needed his validation, and now he's left regretting the person you used to be. The one who would have done anything for him. But that version doesn't exist anymore. You became someone stronger, someone wiser, someone who knows that the best closure isn't a conversation. It's becoming the kind of woman who would never tolerate what broke her in the first place. Love, when it's real, doesn't just disappear overnight. It may change form, It may shift and evolve, but it doesn't simply vanish the moment two people part ways. That's what makes it so hard to let go. Not because you didn't care, but because a part of you still does. You didn't fake it. You didn't hold back. You loved him with everything you had, in your own way, in your own timing. And even after everything, part of that love still lives in your memory, because real love leaves traces, not in a way that keeps you stuck, but in a way that reminds you of the depth you're capable of. He'll remember that, even if he doesn't say it out loud, even if he pretends he's moved on, even if he's with someone else. He'll remember what it felt like to be loved by you. And not just loved in the way that's convenient or fleeting, but loved in a way that saw him. You saw the real him, even when he tried to hide it. You accepted him when he wasn't at his best. You believed him when he didn't believe in himself. That kind of love doesn't just go away. It stays in someone's bones. It becomes a benchmark for every connection that follows. He may not have known how to hold that love when he had it. He may have mistaken your depth for intensity, your care for pressure, your loyalty for something that would always be there no matter how little he gave in return. But over time, he'll begin to realize that love doesn't leave. It just stops waiting. And that's what you did. You didn't stop loving him because you stopped caring. You stopped because you couldn't keep giving to someone who refused to grow with you. You outgrew the version of yourself that needed to prove your love to someone who wasn't ready to receive it. And now, the love you once gave to him is evolving into something else, into boundaries, into self-respect, into the strength to say, I deserve more than this. It doesn't make your love any less real. It just means you're directing it differently. You're learning how to give yourself the same grace, patience, and tenderness you once gave him so easily. And that's what makes this kind of transformation so powerful. You're not closing your heart. You're expanding it in a way that finally includes you. He'll come to feel the difference too. Not in the big, dramatic moments, but in the quiet ones. When he hears a song that reminds him of you, when he sees something funny and instinctively thinks of sharing it with you, when he's sitting next to someone new and realizes he has to filter parts of himself because it's not the same kind of connection. That's when it'll hit him. Not just that he lost you, but the love you gave was real, rare, and irreplaceable. You didn't lose by walking away. You evolved. You learned that love, no matter how deep, isn't enough if it costs you your peace, your self-worth, your sense of direction. And the woman you've become, the one who still loves deeply but no longer chases, is the version of you he'll remember every day. Not because she begged or waited, but because she loved him so purely that when she finally chose herself, it became the moment he realized what he'd truly lost. So no, love doesn't just leave, but it does transform. And in your case, it became something stronger than longing or regret. It became your strength, your healing, your standard. And that's the love he'll never stop missing. Not just what you gave to him, but what you now give to yourself. So, if you've ever wondered whether he'll regret losing you, stop wondering. The answer isn't found in his texts, his silence, or whether he watches your stories. The answer is found in you. In the way you're choosing yourself, healing, and rising. He'll regret it. Not because you made him, but because he'll come to realize too late that what you gave was real. That the love you offered wasn't ordinary. That your presence, your support, your strength, that was the kind of rare he thought would always be there. But this isn't his story anymore. It's yours. And the woman who once gave her heart, hoping he'd see it, has now given that heart back to herself. That's not revenge. That's power. That's growth. That's peace. And that, more than anything, is what he'll regret losing for the rest of his life.